I never imagined that losing my job would cost me my marriage. For 8 years, Jason and I had built what I thought was a stable life together. We owned a beautiful townhouse in Denver, drove reliable cars, and spent our weekends planning vacations we rarely had time to take. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. I believed comfort meant security. I couldn't have been more wrong. My name is Claire Bennett, and until 6 months ago, I worked as a senior financial analyst for a nationwide logistics company. I loved my job. The hours were long, the deadlines were brutal, but solving complicated financial problems gave me a sense of purpose. My performance reviews were always excellent, and my manager often joked that I'd probably replace him one day. Then the company announced a massive restructuring. Everyone knew layoffs were coming, but I wasn't worried. I had seniority, strong numbers, and years of experience. Surely they'd let go of newer employees before someone who had practically lived in that office. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Human Resources asked me to come upstairs. The meeting lasted less than 10 minutes. Claire, the HR representative, said softly, sliding a folder across the table, "This decision has nothing to do with your performance. Your entire department is being eliminated." I barely heard the rest. Severance package. Health insurance. Career assistance. Good luck. I walked out carrying a cardboard box filled with family photos, a coffee mug Emma had given me for my birthday, and a notebook I'd probably never open again. Outside, I sat in my car for almost an hour before driving home. I rehearsed the conversation with Jason the entire way. He'll tell me everything will be okay. We'll figure it out together. That's what marriage is supposed to be. Jason was sitting in the kitchen when I walked in, typing on his laptop. He looked up. "You're home early." I forced a smile that disappeared almost immediately. I lost my job. For a few seconds, he didn't react. Then he slowly closed his laptop. "Seriously?" I nodded. "They eliminated my department." He leaned back in his chair and sighed. Not the comforting sigh I'd hoped for. An annoyed one. "So what now?" "I'll start applying tomorrow," I answered quickly. "I've already been thinking about companies that are hiring." He stared at me longer than felt comfortable. "You know this isn't exactly a great job market." "I know. And your salary covered almost half our expenses." I said I'll find something. He rubbed his forehead. "I can't carry everything by myself, Claire." His words hit me harder than losing my job. "I never asked you to." The room fell silent. That evening, we barely spoke. The next morning, Jason left for work without kissing me goodbye. Over the following weeks, I treated finding a job like a full-time career. I updated my resume, sent applications everywhere, attended networking events, and completed interviews that never led anywhere. Every rejection chipped away at my confidence. Jason noticed. Instead of encouraging me, he grew colder. Every dinner became another conversation about money. Every bill became another reminder that I wasn't earning anything. Every silence became heavier. One evening, after I'd received my 12th rejection email, Jason came home unusually early. He placed a thin envelope on the kitchen table. "I've already signed." I looked down. "Divorce papers." My stomach dropped. "You're joking." "No. You want to divorce me because I lost my job?" He didn't even flinch. "I married someone ambitious. Someone successful. I don't want to spend years waiting for you to get your life together." I felt like the floor disappeared beneath me. "Jason, it's been 3 weeks. I've made my decision." I stared at the man I'd loved for nearly a decade. For the first time, I realized I didn't recognize him anymore. I didn't cry until Jason walked out the front door with his suitcase. The silence he left behind was louder than any argument we'd ever had. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the divorce papers still lying on the coffee table. 3 weeks earlier, I had been worried about finding another job. Now I was facing unemployment, a divorce, and the possibility of losing my home all at once. For 2 days, I barely left the couch. Emma called constantly. I ignored every call. On the third morning, she knocked on my front door. When I didn't answer, she let herself in with the spare key I'd given her years ago. She found me sitting in sweatpants, surrounded by unopened mail. "Claire," she said softly. I looked up, embarrassed. "I've completely fallen apart." Emma sat beside me without saying a word. After a long silence, she asked, "Are you done?" I frowned. "Done with what?" "Feeling sorry for yourself." Her question caught me off guard. "You lost your job. Your husband showed his true colors. Both things hurt. But neither one gets to decide who you become." I looked away. "I don't even know where to start." She smiled. "Start with what you're actually good at." That sentence stayed with me all day. What was I good at? Financial planning. Business strategy. Helping struggling companies become profitable. For years, I'd been solving million-dollar problems for someone else's business. Why couldn't I do it for myself? That evening, I pulled out my laptop. Instead of searching job boards, I searched one phrase. How to start a consulting business. The next week became a blur. I registered a company. Built a simple website. Created professional social media pages. Printed inexpensive business cards. My dining table became my office. I couldn't afford employees. I couldn't afford fancy software. Honestly, I could barely afford groceries. Every dollar mattered. The savings I'd worked years to build disappeared faster than I expected. I canceled streaming services. Stopped eating out. Sold jewelry I hadn't worn in years. Then I sold my second car. Every sacrifice bought me another week. Meanwhile, rejection followed me into entrepreneurship. Companies ignored my emails. Some never responded. Others politely told me they already had consultants. One CEO laughed before hanging up. "We hire firms," he said. "Not unemployed people working from their apartments." I sat staring at my phone long after the call ended. Maybe Jason had been right. Maybe nobody wanted someone who'd already failed. That thought haunted me for days. Then, late one Friday evening, my inbox chimed. The subject line read, "Interested in speaking." It was from a man named Oliver Hayes. He owned a small investment company. He'd somehow come across one of my articles online about reducing unnecessary business expenses. His email was surprisingly short. "I think your ideas are interesting. If you're available Monday morning, I'd like to hear more." I read it 3 times before I believed it was real. Monday couldn't come fast enough. I spent the entire weekend preparing. I researched his company. Studied every interview he'd ever given. Practiced my presentation over and over until I could almost recite it from memory. Monday morning arrived. I walked into Oliver's office wearing the same navy blue suit I'd worn during dozens of interviews. The receptionist smiled. "Mr. Hayes will see you now." As I stepped into his office, I expected another polite rejection. Instead, Oliver stood, shook my hand firmly, and said something I hadn't heard in months. "I've been looking forward to meeting you, Claire." For the first time since losing everything, I felt a small spark of hope. Oliver didn't waste time. He slid a thick folder across his desk. "I've read your article 3 times, he said. "Everything you wrote made sense. Now I want to know if you can do the same thing for one of the companies I've invested in." I opened the folder. Inside were financial statements, quarterly reports, payroll summaries, and operating expenses. "How long do I have?" I asked. He smiled. 45 minutes. I blinked. You want me to review all of this now? I want to see how your mind works. For the next 45 minutes, I forgot about my divorce, my empty bank account, and every rejection I'd received. Numbers had always been my safe place. Patterns began to appear. Unnecessary spending. Duplicate vendor contracts. Poor inventory management. Departments operating with almost no communication. When I finally closed the folder, Oliver leaned forward. So? They don't have a revenue problem. He raised an eyebrow. They have a leadership problem. That got his attention. I spent the next 20 minutes explaining exactly where the company was bleeding money and how I believed it could become profitable within 6 months. When I finished, the room fell silent. Oliver slowly smiled. I was hoping you'd say something completely different. My stomach sank. Instead, he laughed. Because every consultant before you blamed the market. He reached for his phone. I'm calling the CEO. Right there. In front of me. Within minutes, I had my first client. When I left his office, I sat in my car with the signed contract in my hands. I couldn't stop smiling. It wasn't a huge contract. But it was enough. Enough to pay my bills. Enough to prove someone believed in me. Enough to keep going. Over the next 2 months, I worked harder than I ever had in my life. I arrived before sunrise. I left after dark. Sometimes I worked from my apartment until 2 in the morning. Every recommendation I made had to be perfect. Failure wasn't an option anymore. The results came faster than anyone expected. Within 8 weeks, the company had cut unnecessary costs by nearly 20%. Employee productivity improved. Profits increased. Oliver called me personally. You've made me a lot of money, Claire. I just did my job. No, he replied. You solved a problem everyone else ignored. Then he surprised me. I've already recommended you to 3 other CEOs. I nearly dropped the phone. 3 new clients became 5. 5 became 8. Soon I couldn't manage everything alone. That's when I hired Lily Parker. She had recently graduated with a business degree and had been searching for months without success. During her interview, she admitted something that reminded me of myself. I know I don't have much experience, she said nervously, but I'll work harder than anyone you hire. I smiled. I believe you. She became employee number 1. A week later, Emma officially joined the company as our marketing director. The tiny apartment office became impossible to work in. We rented a small office downtown. It wasn't impressive. The carpet was old. The furniture came from second-hand stores. The conference room barely fit 4 people. But when I unlocked the door on our first morning, it felt like a palace. One afternoon, as Lily organized paperwork, she looked at me. Can I ask you something? Of course. Were you always this confident? I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. She looked genuinely surprised. You don't act like someone who was ever broken. I glanced around the office. Maybe because I wasn't anymore. Then my phone rang. The caller ID displayed a name I had never expected to see. Charles Whitmore. The CEO of one of the largest corporations in the country. I took a deep breath before answering. I had no idea that this single phone call was about to change my entire life forever. My assistant tells me you've been getting excellent results, Charles Whitmore said. His voice was calm, confident, and carried the kind of authority that came from leading a billion-dollar company. I've heard good things, I replied carefully. I don't make business decisions based on rumors, he said. I make them based on numbers. That made me smile. I prefer numbers too. So let's talk. 3 days later, I walked into Whitmore Industries headquarters. The lobby alone was larger than my entire office. Charles greeted me personally. He wasn't interested in small talk. For nearly 2 hours, he questioned every strategy I'd ever used, every recommendation I'd made, and every financial projection I presented. It wasn't an interview. It was a test. When we finally finished, he leaned back in his chair. "I've met consultants who talk well," he said. "I've met consultants with impressive resumes." Then he looked me directly in the eyes. "But you're the first one who's actually challenged my assumptions." I wasn't sure whether that was a compliment. Until he slid a contract across the table. "I'd like your company to lead our financial restructuring project." I looked at the number on the last page. For a second, I thought I'd read it wrong. It was worth more money than I had earned during the previous 3 years combined. I couldn't finish the sentence. Charles smiled. "Take your time." I signed anyway. Walking out of that building, I called Emma before I even reached my car. She answered immediately. "Well, we got it." A pause. "Claire, are you crying?" I laughed through tears. "I think so." She screamed so loudly I had to pull the phone away from my ear. That contract changed everything. Within weeks, we hired 5 more consultants. Then 10. We moved into a larger office with glass conference rooms, modern workspaces, and enough room for future growth. For the first time, I had my own office. Emma insisted on decorating it. Lily filled it with plants because she said it looked too serious. I finally bought a decent coffee machine instead of living on cheap instant coffee. Life no longer felt like survival. It felt like progress. One Friday afternoon, Andrew Foster knocked on my office door. Our employee count just reached 50. I looked up from my laptop. "Already?" He nodded. "And we're still interviewing every week." Sometimes I walked through the office just to watch everyone working together. People laughing. Brainstorming. Helping one another. It reminded me why I'd started this company. I wanted to build the kind of workplace where people felt valued, not disposable. The kind of workplace I wished I'd had. One evening, after everyone else had gone home, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Denver. 6 months earlier, I had believed my life was over. Now I was the CEO of one of the fastest-growing consulting firms in the region. Not because someone gave me a chance. Because I refused to quit. Then Emma walked into my office carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed me one. "You know," she said, "I ran into someone yesterday." I smiled. "Who?" She hesitated. "Jason." I hadn't heard his name in months. He didn't look good. I stayed quiet. He lost his job. That surprised me. Emma continued. Apparently, the company he worked for downsized. Half the management team was laid off. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I took a sip of coffee. "I hope he lands on his feet." Emma stared at me. "That's all you have to say?" I nodded. "He made his choices. I've made mine." She smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." The following Monday morning, Andrew walked into my office carrying a stack of resumes. "Claire," he said, placing one folder on top. "I think there's one application you should see yourself." I looked down at the name. My heart skipped a beat. Jason Bennett. For several seconds, I simply stared at the resume. Jason Bennett. The same neat signature. The same confident writing style. The same man who had looked me in the eyes and said he didn't want to be married to a failure. Andrew noticed my expression. "You know him?" I looked up. "He was my husband." Andrew's eyebrows shot up. "I had no idea." neither does anyone else here. He sat down across from my desk. Would you like me to reject the application? It would have been easy. One email. One click. One decision. Instead, I closed the folder. No. Andrew looked confused. Why not? Because this company doesn't operate on personal feelings. He nodded slowly. So what do you want me to do? Treat him like every other candidate. And if he qualifies? Then he gets an interview. Andrew gave me a thoughtful smile. I understand. After he left, I leaned back in my chair. 6 months ago, I had imagined this moment 100 different ways. In every version, I was angry. In every version, I wanted revenge. But sitting there now, I didn't feel any of those things. I simply felt free. The next morning, Andrew returned with another update. His resume is impressive. I know. He has excellent management experience. I know. He also has strong references. I smiled faintly. I know that too. Andrew hesitated. There's one thing. What? He seems desperate. That wasn't the Jason I remembered. The Jason I knew had always believed another opportunity was waiting around the corner. What happened? I asked. Andrew opened the file. After the layoffs, he applied to more than 40 companies. I blinked. 40? Andrew nodded. Most of them froze hiring. What about interviews? He had several. And? No offers. I looked out the window. The job market had changed faster than anyone expected. Even talented people were struggling. Andrew continued. According to his cover letter, he's willing to accept a lower position than he previously held. That sentence stayed with me long after Andrew left. Jason had once told me he would never settle for less. Life had clearly humbled him. Later that afternoon, I walked through the office. Lily was helping a new consultant prepare for a client meeting. Emma was presenting ideas for our newest marketing campaign. People smiled as I passed. Some asked quick questions. Others simply waved. This company had become more than a business. It had become a family. A family built on respect. Not fear. Not ego. Not status. That evening, Andrew knocked again. I've scheduled tomorrow's interviews. He paused. Jason's is at 10 o'clock. I nodded. Good. You'll be on the final interview panel? Yes. Andrew studied my face carefully. Are you sure? I smiled. If I avoid one interview because of my past, then everything I've built means nothing. The next morning, I arrived earlier than usual. I reviewed client reports. Answered emails. Signed contracts. Anything to keep my mind busy. At 9:55, Andrew called my office. Our candidate is here. I stood. Straightened my blazer. Took one slow breath. As I walked toward the conference room, I saw Jason through the glass wall. He looked different. The expensive tailored suits were gone. His shoulders were lower. The confidence that had once filled every room had been replaced by quiet uncertainty. He had no idea I was the CEO. He thought he was about to interview with another executive. Andrew opened the conference room door. Mr. Bennett, he said. Our CEO is ready to meet you now. Jason stood, adjusted his tie, and turned toward the doorway. The moment our eyes met, the color drained from his face. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Jason looked as if he'd seen a ghost. Claire? His voice was barely above a whisper. I stepped into the conference room and took my seat at the head of the table. Good morning, Mr. Bennett. Andrew glanced between us, sensing the tension, but remained silent. Jason slowly sat down. I didn't know this was your company. I know. He swallowed hard. If I had known. You still would have needed to earn the position. The room fell quiet. Andrew opened Jason's file. We'll begin with a few standard questions. Jason nodded, though he never stopped looking at me. For the next 30 minutes, Andrew led the interview. Jason answered professionally. He spoke about leadership, budgeting, team management, and crisis planning. Objectively, he interviewed well. Very well. If I had never met him before, I would have considered him one of the strongest candidates we'd seen that month. Then it was my turn. I closed the resume in front of me. Mr. Bennett, I began, tell me about the biggest mistake you've made in your career. He hesitated. I've made several. Which one taught you the most? He looked directly at me. For the first time since entering the room, there was no confidence in his eyes. Only regret. I spent too much time judging people by their success. The room became completely silent. I believed that if someone lost their job, it meant they'd failed. He took a slow breath. I was wrong. Andrew quietly lowered his pen. Jason continued. I confused temporary circumstances with someone's value. His voice cracked slightly. And I lost the best person in my life because of it. I didn't interrupt him. I've had 6 months to think about my decisions, he said. I've replayed that night in my head more times than I can count. He looked down at his hands. I wish I could take it back. I finally spoke. Why? He frowned. Because I hurt you. No. I kept my voice calm. Why do you wish you could take it back? He stared at me for several seconds before answering. Because I finally understand what loyalty actually means. No one spoke. Then I asked the question I'd carried with me for months. When I lost my job. I paused. Did you ever believe I would recover? He didn't answer immediately. Finally, he shook his head. No. Why not? I was arrogant. He let out a bitter laugh. I thought my career made me better than everyone else. Another silence filled the room. Then he said something I never expected. I underestimated you. Those 3 words carried more honesty than every apology he'd offered. I nodded once. Thank you for answering honestly. The interview ended a few minutes later. Jason stood. So. He gave a sad smile. I suppose this is goodbye. I looked at Andrew. We'll discuss all candidates and notify everyone of our decision. Jason nodded. I understand. Before leaving, he stopped at the door. Claire. I met his eyes. I'm truly sorry. Then he walked away. The door closed behind him. Andrew was the first to speak. That. He exhaled slowly. Was one of the most uncomfortable interviews I've ever witnessed. I couldn't help smiling. It was also one of the most honest. Andrew looked at Jason's evaluation form. Professionally speaking. He tapped the paper. He's qualified. I know. So what happens now? I looked through the glass wall as Jason disappeared into the elevator. For months, I had imagined rejecting him. Watching him experience the same pain he'd caused me. But standing there, I realized revenge wouldn't change my past. It wouldn't heal me. I'd already won the day I stopped needing his approval. I picked up my pen and wrote my final decision across the top of his application. Andrew leaned forward to read it. His eyes widened. Andrew looked back at me. Are you serious? I nodded. Completely. He picked up the evaluation sheet again, making sure he had read it correctly. Offer position, Senior Operations Manager. This is one of the highest positions we've hired for this year, he said. I know. Most people would have rejected him immediately. Most people don't get to choose who they become after being hurt. Andrew remained silent for a moment. You're certain this isn't pity? No. Then why? I folded my hands on the table. Because if this company only gave opportunities to perfect people, none of us would be here. Andrew smiled. That's a very CEO answer. I laughed. Maybe. He stood. I'll prepare the offer. Before leaving, he stopped at the door. Claire? Yes? You should be proud of yourself. After he left, I sat alone for several minutes. It wasn't because I still loved Jason. I didn't. It wasn't because I wanted him back. I definitely didn't. It was because I finally understood something. Forgiveness isn't forgetting what happened. It's refusing to let someone else's worst decision control your future. The following morning, Jason returned to the office. Andrew escorted him into a smaller meeting room. I watched through the glass from my office but didn't go inside. A few minutes later, Andrew knocked on my door. He accepted. I nodded. When does he start? Monday. Good. Andrew hesitated. He asked if he could speak with you. I thought about it for a second. Send him in. Jason entered quietly. He looked nervous. Very different from the confident executive I'd once been married to. He closed the door behind him. I wasn't expecting this. I know. I thought you were going to reject me. I considered every candidate the same way. He lowered his eyes. I don't deserve that. Maybe not. He looked up. But this company isn't built around what people deserve. It's built around what they're capable of becoming. Jason slowly nodded. I'll work hard. I expect you to. He smiled faintly. You always did. For the first time in months, the silence between us wasn't painful. It was peaceful. Finally, Jason spoke again. I owe you something. You don't owe me anything. I owe you the truth. I waited. When you lost your job. He sighed. I was terrified. I frowned. Terrified? I had built my entire identity around success. He looked around my office. The moment you lost yours, I convinced myself I'd lose mine too. So you left? Yes. He laughed bitterly. I thought I was protecting my future. Instead, I destroyed it. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. He had already learned the lesson life wanted him to learn. As he stood to leave, he paused one last time. I don't expect forgiveness. You already have it. His eyes widened. But understand something. He nodded. I forgave you for my own peace. Not for yours. He swallowed hard. I understand. Then he quietly walked out of my office. I never looked back. Instead, I turned toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. 6 months earlier, I had stood in a silent house wondering if my life was over. Now I was leading a company filled with people who believed in one another. I had lost a husband. But somewhere along the way, I had finally found myself. Monday morning arrived with the usual rhythm of a busy office. Phones rang. Keyboards clicked. Meeting rooms filled one after another. From my office window, I watched employees greeting one another with coffee cups in their hands. Among them was Jason. He wasn't wearing an expensive designer suit anymore. He wasn't walking through the office like he owned it. Instead, he smiled at the receptionist, introduced himself to people he had never met, and quietly took notes during orientation. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked humble. Over the following months, I rarely worked with him directly. That wasn't intentional. Our departments simply didn't overlap very often. Whenever we crossed paths, our conversations stayed professional. "Good morning, Claire." "Morning, Jason. Here's the quarterly report." "Thank you." Nothing more. And somehow, that was exactly how it should be. Jason worked harder than anyone expected. He arrived early. Stayed late. Never complained. Instead of trying to impress executives, he focused on helping his team succeed. Even Andrew noticed. One afternoon, he walked into my office carrying another performance report. "I've never seen someone change this much." I smiled. "People can surprise you." He turned down a promotion. That caught my attention. "Why?" Andrew shrugged. He said he still has a lot to learn before leading a larger department. I couldn't help smiling. The old Jason would have accepted the promotion before hearing the salary. Months later, our company celebrated another milestone. 100 employees. When Emma insisted on hosting a small celebration, everyone gathered in the main conference hall. Laughter filled the room. Someone ordered far too much pizza. Lily convinced half the office to play ridiculous team games. For a few hours, nobody talked about deadlines or contracts. They simply enjoyed being together. As CEO, I thanked everyone for believing in the company. "This business was built during one of the hardest periods of my life," I told them. "But it succeeded because people chose to support each other instead of competing against one another." The room erupted into applause. When the celebration ended, Jason quietly approached me. "There was a time," he said, "when I thought success meant having the highest salary in the room." He looked around at the employees laughing together. "I understand now." "What do you understand?" "Success is building something that makes other people's lives better." I nodded. "I hope you never forget that." "I won't." That was the last personal conversation we ever had. A year later, Whitmore Business Magazine published its annual list of the fastest-growing consulting firms in the region. Our company ranked first. Emma burst into my office holding the magazine above her head. "We did it." Lily followed close behind, nearly spilling coffee everywhere. The entire office celebrated. As everyone congratulated one another, I quietly stepped into my office and looked at the framed photo on my bookshelf. It wasn't of awards. Or buildings. Or contracts. It was a simple picture of me, Emma, and Lily standing inside our tiny first office with second-hand furniture and cheap folding chairs. That was the moment everything had truly begun. Losing my job felt like the end of my life. In reality, it was the beginning of the life I was always meant to have. And the man who once left because he thought I was a failure? He unknowingly gave me the greatest opportunity I'd ever receive. Not because he came back, but because he forced me to discover that my worth had never depended on anyone else's belief in me. Sometimes the people who walk away from you aren't ending your story. They're simply making room for the life you're about to build.